Hallo. Oh, ich bin schon laut, ja.
Hi, yeah, well, nice for you to be here. Well, I'm very happy to be here too. I'm happy that you are here. Hi. And I think it's so great that you'll be doing the opening keynote for us and giving the first keynote. So can you give us a bit of a preview what we should expect? Well, don't expect anything, please, so that I can surprise you. I've just come back from the 6-week travel through Europe for a documentary series about Europe, so I'm in a kind of jazz mode. I have lots of thoughts. I don't know if I can get them sorted as much as I would like, but I'm sure I could give you a few points that might get you talking. Great. I'll give you the stage, and I'll be coming back, though. So please have fun with Jagoda. Thank you. Well, there's quite a walk up here, but here we are. And I have to say, it's fantastic. As has just been said, I like to do podcasts, and that is a very lonely situation. And speaking in front of so many people, that's something that I have done a lot a few years ago. And then I kind of said goodbye to that. And it's kind of touching to see that we are coming together and that as a democracy, we have this kind of public sphere. And I'm happy that Republica exists, that people are getting involved, that they care. And I was looking at someone talking about AI last year. I'm glad to be able to talk about human and emotional intelligence. That, for me, is the basic precondition for everything that we create or that we get done or don't manage to get done. And I'm serious about this jazz thing. There are so many things that I wanted to get into this. This is the first actual event that I accepted. And there are so many people that want to show what they do and want to connect with others. I'm not afraid of people that say, this is the bubble celebrating themselves. I think it's allowed to celebrate yourself if throughout the day and the year you are striving for things. You have a kind of right to self-reassurance, whatever is happening out there. And as an introduction, I brought a small image with me, which you all probably know, and that is useful in so many situations, and that is this very well-known small, big image of David Foster Wallace. I'm going to read it out in English and then explain to you why I think it's a very, very apt image for today.
There are these two young fish
swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" With this motto, I had to think of this year's Republica, because who cares? That is what I'm asking exactly those who are staging this forum every year and with you and your ideas want to drive social change. And the question, therefore, today is, what the hell is water and who the hell cares? We care. You are in the middle of it. And it's even more, all the more important to find out what actually we care about so much, all of us. The best answer to the question who cares for me has always been I do. To not point at others and say this one's not doing enough and this one's not doing enough, but do I do enough? And that's the spirit in which I would like to hold this keynote, which I'm very happy to be able to give. I want to move away from talking about conventional care work, which we will surely talk about a lot, but move on to the care work for society. We talk about care work for relationships, for nursing care, all these things. But what we actually bring along, what we take from our interior world and present to the outside, that has always been the big decision. If I asked who cares, it's always been I care, and that makes you vulnerable every time. The mere fact that I have been traveling for 8 weeks and thinking I'm actually too tired to be standing in front of all these people, but I cannot risk my thoughts to be dissected. But the question is, who cares? And that is something that a democracy has to be built upon, because democracy is the civil society. I've always tried to be working on two levels. Not always. I started out as a writer for myself and in publications, and I thought the theory is the one thing. You go to a ministry and give a talk, and you have people sitting there, and quite often they think along the same lines as you do, or there is a kind of consensus. Maybe that is here too. And then I thought, what is actually the value of these talking and these theories if I don't get them tested and try to put it into practice, what I've said, to actually try out the change that I think is possible and risk failing. So after a few years of speaking in ministries about integration, about diversity, about inclusion, I thought I'll now go out. The city of Heidelberg was looking for someone to run an intercultural center, and I thought that's where I'll go, and I'll try with all that I've done and find out, is it actually still possible? Can I work in the institutions? Can I offer this to a commune? There are people behind there who are dreaming of change. Can I do that? And how can I do that? And in these 10 years of my life that I gave to this kind of work, the decision to say I want to move away from just talking in circles where there is a certain consensus and into a commune where, of course, there are manifold opinions and where political decisions are taken, and where I actually have to get those onto my side that actually don't care in any way about what I say and about the change I want to achieve. Can I create a majority? Because we tend to forget in these heated times where everyone thinks they are right, that we actually have to fight for a majority. And these impulses, my jazz impulses, I've actually divided into 3 categories. The first is soft radicality, which is about the attitude that in these 10 years I developed for myself to actually be able to do this work in the public sphere and shape change and not harden up as a person. And this wish to be somewhat softer for a society, make that usable for a society too. This dilemma of saying a hardened society could be opened up for diversity, for inclusion, but at the same time not become hardened yourselves because there are so many wars you run up against, not become the way that the people that let you run into these walls. So I'm going to talk about soft radicality, then about the firewall, which is related to a column that I wrote, which caused a lot of reactions, where I didn't believe that it would actually be possible. It was a column I wrote after this secret meeting, in quotes, happened in Potsdam of the right extremist AfD party and others. And I talked with someone and said, I'm going to make this a big column and talk about what it means as a person with a migration history to actually meet these people where someone plans to actually throw you out of this country. And early this year it was Potsdam, and just recently it was Sylt, where people were just shouting right extremist things. So getting in touch with these people that are not in top of the food chain economically too, that was another issue. And my third point was self-care. I want to talk about what it means if you ask who cares, and the answer is I care. And that actually gets you into a huge maelstrom of people, thoughts, and movements. You shape democracy, I want to say, but democracy shapes you back. So the thing that we want to change, it's a full circle every time. You change society, society changes you, and it just mixes you up completely, and you meet so many people that you perhaps wouldn't like to meet. Hate speech is one issue here. So how do you deal with this? And what is it like for those that are here at publica, perhaps because they want to care? And you can realize, you can notice how much of the things we talk about is coming from an Anglo-Saxon background, so that's why I'm using many English words in the original. And the last word I would like to give you is self-care. So how do you look after yourself? Because that, of course, is also a necessity. So the first thing is soft radicality that I learned about in the city of Heidelberg. trying to get a communal project going. And looking back, I think that was kind of a crazy thing to try because I didn't know what that would entail. So for 20 years, foreigners at the time, were calling for a place that would be open for NGOs, for democratic exchange, for a society that doesn't understand migration as a deficit. They wanted a space where they could talk about their resources, their richness. And I thought that is something I want to do. It was kind of related to the fact that Heidelberg is a very atypical city. The migrant society is a very academic. So I thought this might be a place where I could set an example for Germany, how it could work and how you could understand it not as a deficit, but as a plus. If I don't have to go to the town council and say the migrants have these problems, we have to teach them these and those things. We have resources here. We have people that are more educated on average than you are, more cosmopolitan. What could you learn from them? We could be a country of migration and actually see that in a positive way and not fight that based on a rhetoric of 50 years ago, but actually dream of a future that we could shape together. And I thought this kind of city would have to be one where this is easy. Of course, it wasn't easy. I started to talk about this with people. I wanted to stay for only 1 or 2 years. I got to know very many so-called foreigners. I use the term so-called because, well, they didn't have a German passport. But we don't talk about the fact that more people than ever do not have a German passport in Germany. Millions are not actually eligible to vote. And it's important to not gloss over that fact and just talk about migrants. We have to talk about our citizenship legislation, and that this legislation has grave implications for them. They cannot vote for the politicians or against them that make the policies that determine their lives. So people that were growing up with this kind of concept went to me and told me, well, nothing's ever been done for us. I have always been the problem. I'm afraid of German bureaucracy and administration. And then someone came to me, someone I will never forget. He had Turkish roots. And he said, I don't know if I can believe you when you say that you are going to see us as a resource, because what I have learned in Germany has been that people will only help us. I'm going to say it as harshly as he did. What I have experienced is they want to hack our legs off and then give us crutches. So they've always been told that they have a deficit, and if you don't see that, we will find that deficit, and then we'll give you help to actually escape that deficit. And that touched me, and I then said to myself that every time I do this work, I will not let the right extremists push me into a certain corner and talk about deficits. I'm going to look for these resources, and I will provide a stage for them. I will provide the resources. And it wasn't that easy, because even German grant policies require you to formulate a deficit if you want to be supported. You have to go and say, what are the things that these people cannot do? And then you are getting the support that you need. So you have about these cultures that are not German, but what about the cultures that also exist on German soil? And if I have been told that when there was a certain normality, people told us, well, what's the problem now? We have these people, we have these projects that are running, so what's missing? Why do you still need us? So the things that were good were not strengthened, and that was perhaps the most important message that I learned. We are a country that has to learn to think about the good things and strengthen those good things in whatever way.
We really have to learn to trust in the good, to not make it invisible. 2015 was just one example. 9 million people nearly disappeared historically, and instead the few who were angry were so overrepresented that 9 million merely disappeared. And that taught me that even when I argue with people who are putting down others, I'm actually putting a light on those people. So I had to self-discipline over the last 10 years. Whenever the loud criers turned up and you wanted to defend yourself, to not forget about those who do good. I will not give my attention to the loud people. So soft radicality, to not use radicality to support those who decry others. My learning was that you have to have rules in discussion, that you have to demand those rules, and those who do not keep with those rules, I'm not going to argue with them because they're not playing according to the rules. So that doesn't mean that you can't swear or get angry, but I don't want to exclude those from this discussion about democracy, not exclude those who are invisible, those who are not talked about, but who know exactly who are the people in power and what they're doing. So the time has come to talk to everyone. So that also included social media. In Heidelberg, I did my work silently. And within 2.5 years, I managed to make an idea that was 20 years old become a reality, a parliament decision where the AfD did not vote and did not want that. And in the beginning, reactions were negative. People said, you're not the first one who's trying to do something and it'll just end up in the drawer. And maybe the most hurtful reaction was a bourgeois guy who said to me, no one needs a migrant scrapyard like the one you're trying to build. I didn't know it was possible to think that way. I'd never provoked it. Up until then, I'd been an author, and you kind of have the opportunity to hide yourself. And when I tried to change society, I came to certain realizations. People who studied with me and said, well, you're taking over. Who do you mean you? What do you mean take over? Well, there's this German-Turkish person and you, so you're taking leadership, you're taking over, aren't you? So our generation, for who it was normal that migrants are part of our lives, are still caught up in this binary way of thinking. And it's my task and all of our task to not get stuck in this binary thinking. And the migrant scrapyard man, I looked him in the eyes and I thought, well, I can either start a racism debate or I can lecture him, but I just looked into his eyes and I visualized a timeline. And yes, at some point, you will be in this and you will say, yes, this was my form of radicality, the soft radicality. So at this point, I don't want to pretend it's not hurtful, it's not degrading as an overachiever in this country, because you're the example that shows that migrants are not like that. You're the example of a perfect migrant. We study, we're ambitious, and suddenly it's my task. Well, only because I have certain talents and my background. I just want to say, if you don't assimilate, if you keep your memories, your history, your home country, you will stay vulnerable. And this is also a good thing. After 2.5 years, I had the permission to build this house. So the man who said migrant scrapyard later spoke out in favor of this house. I knew that it was possible. It's just one example of many, of people who came here, who experienced things together and not through debates. Maybe this is one of the difficult points I want to bring across today. We are used to a culture of discussions. It's in the sense of Habermas, an existential part of our democracy, which personally I love, but we tend to forget the moment to experience things together with others beyond discussions. So it's not just about discussing, about being right, about arguing. It means building something. And it's difficult with placative truths that sound right on the internet. When is someone a racist? When is someone this and that? It's often not as simple. But these labels sometimes make it impossible for us to... It's very improbable that many of us in the room have racist patterns of thinkings, but only if we accept this fluidity, we can say to ourselves, okay, those are my shortcomings, this is what I want to learn, and then I can approach other people and, well, see their patterns of thoughts. And if you try to fight against that, you're just putting a mirror in front of yourself. So you have to take a different approach. And this is something we've forgotten how to do. We also go along with people who we don't agree with in democracy, and this will decide on whether it will be successful or not. A presidential candidate who has lost the election, will he concede that? And this is what it all comes down to. How livable is our democracy? This house, interestingly, still cost me 10 years. I thought it was 2. So much for who cares. If you decide to take over responsibility, the connections form. I knew that if I leave, everything will collapse behind me, and that gave me the feeling that I would have to stay. So I worked together with the migrant office. We enhanced the democratic processes. So it all comes from one small community in a backyard or something, an institution of the community. The community took this topic, and it's not yet perfect. It will never be perfect. We can always take steps back, but the potential is there, and that was important to me. And I think after 10 years, I knew I could leave it alone and come back to writing. This is what is beginning now, and writing is something, well, do people actually read anymore? Are they ready for more complex content than an Instagram tile? When this Potsdam secret meeting was uncovered, although I don't like the term secret meeting since it was pretty much an open secret all along, it was about, will I write a piece about this? I had actually stopped writing speeches. And when I was writing, I got the feeling, well, when people like that come into power, you will be the first one who will be expelled. So how do we care in a society where we know that at so many fringes it's getting dangerous for the individual? In my articles, I will not discuss right-wing ideologies and ideas. I want to reinforce what I'm fighting for and what motivates me. Many people are sharing it on the social media. Margot Friedländer, who said this was how it began back then, to remember that we can't underestimate reality. We are always constructing the future of tomorrow, and if we have the feeling we have to raise our voices, we have to raise our voices. And everyone who lived through this dark period in history knows that the powerlessness is created when people become deaf emotionally, when they don't raise their voices. So I want to encourage you all to raise your voices. And why do we have to do that? Isn't it pretentious in these times? Isn't it virtue signaling? Because you're sharing on your social media, posting photos and so on. Isn't that a bad thing in Europe where right-wing extremism is taking up the streets? There's a right-wing extremist movement that wants to usurp democratic institutions. I want to build institutions that are there for an open society. We have to reinforce our democracy to build institutions. It sounds old-fashioned, but the fight against right-wing extremism is also a march through the institutions, because if Democrats don't march through the institutions, right-wing extremists will do it. So everyone is needed to find their paths to vitalize our democratic institutions, to bring them back, to not give up space to right-wing extremists. Democracy can be abolished by democratic means. That is the Achilles heel of our society. This is why we need civil society. This is why we need every individual. This is why we need people standing up and saying this isn't okay. So I can't give a guideline on how to deal with videos like the one from Sylt. But we're tired of patterns of speech coming back from the 70s and 80s that led to right-wing extremist attacks in the 90s. We cannot accept this, and we do not have to accept this. Anti-democrats would abolish democracy by democratic means. So I'm not interested in whether someone has been elected democratically. I'm interested in whether they spread democratic content or anti-democratic content. At the moment, it's not about outrage, moral. Many are discussing about the outrage and the moralizing. There are forms I would also criticize. I will come back to that. But still, this form of outrage, if we do not pervert it, this is what outrage means. It's a form of care work, like it's a form of care work to keep social networks free from lies. It's a care work against troll factories, fighting against disinformation. Care work has many faces today. Societal care work is what this democracy needs. We need the end of a silent majority that thinks that if you remain silent, everything will come into place. History shows us the opposite. We have to actively put things into place. And this takes me to the last part of my presentation. self-care. It's always kind of embarrassing to talk about yourself in times where our planet is threatened by climate change, so many wars. Can you talk about self-care at a conference like this? I think you have to, because only if we stay sane inside, we can fight the fights that I just described. And at this point, with self-care, I would like to appeal to everyone. Social media, when I worked in Heidelberg, I avoided them because I always had to explain my migrant background, why I have a right to participate. Am I not too white, too blonde? There was competing for who's the most victimized. Isn't racism against white people part of German racist history? Guest workers in Germany, should we attack each other, or should we use social media to bring topics into debate, positive topics, content, openness, softness, vulnerability, interest in each other? I stayed, and I will stay in social media because I do still find them important. I'm shocked as everyone else, by how many right-wing extremists lurk on TikTok to draw in young people. And statistically, young people are falling for this. They find right-wing extremist world's views attractive. Suddenly, they are attracted by authoritarian models, and it is our responsibility to show them why it matters to care, why it matters to be responsible. Care work for yourself at home. Let me just give you one sentence. It's a bit of jazz. There's a group of people in this country, people with migrant background. They still can't vote. They're usually not integrated into voluntary work structures, but still they do a lot of informal care work on a neighborhood level. I know so many immigrants who should have a Medal of the Public Merit. They help their neighbors, they help them find an apartment. Even if their German is broken, they do their best to integrate other immigrants. And my wish is for this care work of the invisible million people, people with broken German who care for each other, to be visible. So please give a round of applause for this thought.
And I always say self-care is a bit embarrassing as a term because it's always a question, when do I actually have some time off? I'm not a fan of this looking at yourself in self-inspection, too much of it, but I've found some great literature that showed me, and I would like to share two pieces of literature for all those that might be working in this area. I'm not without reason, I haven't selected to women without reason, because the kind of care work that I'm now focusing on is, of course, dominated by that one by Audrey. Of course, I'm afraid, because the transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation, and that always seems fraught with danger. So I'm going to repeat this in German. Of course, I'm afraid, because the transformation of silence into language and action is always an act of self-revelation, and that is always fraught with danger. I have the need to say this here because, well, I really thought that with my generation this might end, but we're talking about fantasies, how people can be expelled from this country. One of my first speeches in the country were political speeches that I held after the NSU right-wing terrorist group had murdered immigrants. I told people that now this is your land too. You can stay here. We are standing behind you. We are 25% in this country. And no one has the right through permanent violence to give you the feeling that this is not your home and not your security. You have no right to do that. And each and every one of you that has to leave is someone for whom I would like to stand up here. So what Audre Lorde said, it's always an act of self-revelation. It's always dangerous. There's no child without a migration history whose parents never told them, is that something you need to do? Can't Germans do it? Because they were afraid of their children. And you have become so accustomed to this that this is something normal in your country. When there were surveys of young people with a migrant background, and after these slogans were shouted in Sylt, the answers were, I'm not shocked, I'm used to this. We talk about future, we talk about change, but when will it change? Or how are they going to take this change back before we can really put it into place? So we have to get active now, we have to get it done. Social movements are the firewall. Social movements are the people that get together, take to the streets, and this kind of digital mass. I always say this, the people that put up the beer tents in festivals, but also those that have the ability to kick off a digital avalanche, the people that took to the streets immediately after Potsdam. You can't ridicule this. You can't have it ridiculed by those that are cynically lounging on their sofas. And you wonder where they are getting this from when people see that around them in Germany, in other countries, authoritarian rulers are kicking off wars. You have to show that the authority is not the strongest. I now quote Gloria Steinem as the last person. It's a very banal sentence that she wrote, and I think I've lost it somewhere. Gloria Steinem, self-esteem isn't everything. It's just that there is nothing without it. And I have brought this with me because I spent a lot of time in the US, and people in Germany are often afraid, especially when they work together, to believe in a strong ego. You often in these influencer times, you get into a feeling of this is too much self-representation. But to love the ego, the self, and then the others is the beginning of everything we can do to perhaps make this hate somewhat smaller. If we can actually get love out into the world, we'll have to see. But that's what I hope for all of us. And I'm thankful to all of you who are here and show that they care. And I hope that my jazz has kind of worked. Maybe there were 2 or 3 thoughts that might stay with you that you would like to talk about, to strengthen yourself, maybe to reflect, whatever. But vitality, what lives within us, I think, is the most important firewall. Thank you. Jagoda. A deserved applause. Well, first of all, thanks so much for this opening keynote. I think that was something we all needed to see clearly again. But I would like to know something very different. You said you have been traveling for 6 weeks. Where were you for this documentary? I was in 10 European regions, 6 countries, Poland. Well, I hope I can get the list together. Poland, France, Italy, Spain, Germany. I forget. But I was there, And there are films, 6 films, where I try to go to these places where it hurts in society. Where are these breaking points in Europe? Where are people having ideas for the futures? There are 6 films on Arte. Europe, Nice to Meet You is the name of the series, and I would be happy if you like to look at them. Is Europe particularly vulnerable, threatened at the moment? Well, I think we are. And I think that there's a certain strength that you can draw from this journey to see that it is about all of us. In Italy, you will talk to people that haven't resigned, but that know that this kind of shift to the right has happened. How do I get it back? How do I get the country back? I was in Poland, and it was giving me so much hope to see that people have actually managed to vote the old government out. Nothing has motivated me as much as Poland, because people weren't actually as proud of that election result. They do deserve an applause, though, because they said, it's actually not that important that we've won this election. It's important that with the actions we had in advance, we actually reached many people. Many people voted the way they did because they were sick of corruption, but through these protests, many Polish people have started to think differently. So the PIS party that were able to kind of get into people's heads suddenly wasn't as threatening as an authoritarian government, and that was what people were proud of, and that was very impressive to me. Yes, and I always find it very strange. There is no single line. You can say that there's this wave towards the right and then towards the left. We have this big shift to the right, but as you said, Poland, Spain, the election before last, there were these kind of wave breakers from the left that were kind of putting a stop. Can we find a certain systematic feature in this? Well, it depends on the kind of measure, the kind of level that you look at. If we accept that we have people dying out there, is it a shift to the right? If this is not being prevented, we have to do this as humanitarians, prevent these deaths. And I do believe that we have to be honest. In France, we have Marine Le Pen, who is very strong, who even believes that the German far-right AfD is too far-right in her view, because she wants to portray herself as a serious partner. And we cannot underestimate this. The structures that exist, that are being built, the foundations that are being made, what has happened on the left side of the spectrum is now happening on the right. It's the rhetoric, even the kind of structures that they got used to that were supposed to further democracy, they are now taken over or rebuilt against democracy. If civil society becomes anti-democratic, that is the real danger. If people in India tell me that Hindu nationalism is terrible, the people in power are terrible, but it's actually the mob in the country, in society, that isn't afraid of this and is supporting this. That is the most the important danger, because it's about making sure that in the breadth of society, whoever is in power, there's always a center in society that has this democratic power, and it has to be a broad spectrum, not just the left, a really broad spectrum. A stable majority in the center that is fighting for democracy. That is important. If we focus Germany now, it is actually quite a miracle, or quite a mystery, how these resources are provided, because you have to fight back against all the nonsense that is being spread all the time. How can you work against that and say, no, this is actually nonsense? You are always busy to fight against something rather than constructively build up or point at positive things. How can you actually use resources in a more sensible way? Actually, I'm quite happy that you are focusing this, because I've said, well, people might say we're just talking, but I believe in the power of the argument and the power of fact. I think we are neglecting the power of experience and the power of working together in an emphatic way, and through that you might actually dislodge something that you cannot work against in another way. So by not making an offer where I say we have to fight back against political advertising, how do you want to change your city? How do you want to get people together? And that was the healing experience in the city of Heidelberg. Because by just thinking, I noticed that I felt critical. The more critical, the more clever I would think. But the fact that cleverness actually consists of risking something that 10,000 others might criticize, but then they criticize getting involved, to actually get people involved in your dream, to work with others. That kind of togetherness is what's missing. And when I was in Italy or Croatia, when people were singing with each other in the evening, I don't know how many times in Germany people found it cool to be singing with each other without thinking, well, is this really good? So to forget how you think politically, to build in the streets, in the gardens, a sense of neighborhood, a sense of togetherness, where differences can perhaps be ignored for a while. We are in a mood of always thinking, where are you? What have you shared on Instagram? What have you said? If we make this the measure of everything before actually interacting, we actually dissolve the interhuman connections, the empathy that we need, even if someone is alien to us. We need to be empathetic. Actually, that is a good call for the singing that we will have at Republica, and to actually get into action. That's a very good thing to say. I live in Pankow in Berlin, and there are a few streets there where just looking at the houses, you have bunting over the roads from one house to the next, which makes the place so much more inviting. So people from that house have communicated with people from the other house to get this set up. So these little things are where it starts, right? If I see the other person, if I react, that actually is something that is possible in an everyday situation. And I don't understand the grumpiness in an everyday situation that we have so often in Germany. In other countries, journeying into Europe, I see this kind of understanding, oh, you are a person, it's not easy for you either. Everywhere, the middle of society is fighting against decline. So a kind of empathy, a kind of forgiveness, a little detail. When in Spain, I often daydream, and when in Spain, I bump into someone, and quite often in Germany, I would be told, oh, take care where you're going. But in Spain, I would be told, look after yourself. So the assumption was not that I want to hurt someone, they are caring for me. And to have this kind of presence in an everyday situation, to see how is someone that is sitting there and looking at me, and a civil society that is so strongly organized in various associations and clubs has the danger of not seeing the individual in their function, in their situation. What is someone's worth if they're not the head of some association or club, and if they are in danger of being sorted out, a mayor that is being retired, whatever. If you don't have a title, you are no one. And that often is the way that we deal with someone, this kind of thinking in ranks. If we can break that open to some extent and not raise ourselves above someone else and get onto the same level with them, and that is a kind of dream, something small that is not a political program, but starts with something we can do and where we can actually learn from countries. But it is hard work in those countries too. I was in Spain and thought everyone is so new age, just like the Americans. I'm not a fan of this kind of self-optimization, but this working on yourself is so much related to how much presence, awareness do I have of what is happening inside me to better shape what is around me. And that was what I thought of this Gloria Steinem quote, to be able to react to the outside. If these both factors are there, with all the differences in everyday life, it helps. And I would like to get out of this fighting spirit in Germany and learn the friendliness. That is true.
That reminds me, I'm from Cologne, and if you watch people in the pub, there's often a dialogue, someone's coming in and they're being asked, "Wie is it? Like, how are things going?" And the answer is always, "So how about you?" They're really nice. You talk to strangers, and talking to strangers, when you go to the swimming pool and there's the older generation, and they're always talking to other people at the pool as a lack of alternative. They're talking about their doctors, their children, their little speaking machines. So they produce thoughts and share them. And of course, that has to do with the fact that we are experiencing the first generation. And I've talked about the people who developed that. We have a generation of children who experience the extent of the digital world, where we don't even know how responsibly we are doing this. And the repercussions are a thing we will have to see in the future. Well, you talked about German debate culture. That discourse is taking us very important here, and it's very important to people. I sometimes get the feelings that Germans aren't very good at debating, but there's a very highly intellectual discourse that doesn't take many people along. It's just given or trickled down. I don't think that Germans are as debative as maybe British people or Americans, where you have debating clubs in school, where you learn how to take a stance or take the other position. Is that a problem here? I don't want to get too into that, but I've lived abroad for a while and I missed it, because I have friends from Argentina who had a big crisis that completely took over the country. It was unrecognizable, and they said, we envy you for the small debates, like about an increase in university fees of 10 euro. I think that's a quality that we have, and the question is how we structure it. In Italy, I talked to a chef who said Italians love to argue, especially if the other person has another opinion, but still we don't lose ourselves and each other's, and we don't have to convince each other. And this is what we sometimes misunderstand. We misunderstand arguing because we think we have to convince the other party, but actually we just want to understand the other party better. Everyone can keep their opinion, but you've had an exchange. And tomorrow you can say, well, my car is broken, can you help me out? And this is what constructs a neighborhood. Last week we fought, but this week my car's broken down and you can help me. She lived in the US, and she said she left the US and she doesn't want to live without that. We do not discuss to win a fight, but to understand, and maybe to even change ourselves. And this is why arguing feels so frustrating, because it's always about winning. That's boring, because we're not even good at it. And to be so rhetorically invested that you want to listen to people, it's still kind of putting yourself above the other. I've seen many European countries, and I like to compare. And if you're arguing, enjoying the debate, enjoying the art of discussing without wanting to win the other person over, well, I love arguing. I love arguing about important things. And as soon as it becomes important, I get this feeling that I have to convince the other party, even if it's about which is Nirvana's best album. I can argue for 3 hours, and I have fun doing that. And it's difficult to bring that together. Well, you have to also learn to not argue, because that's also a fear that we have when you talk about important topics, when you argue about important topics in society. There's this fear that the family will fall apart, for example, that we lose our connections to others, making our worldview two-dimensional. It's difficult to support this duality of opinions. I believe that we can argue about important topics without losing the other. Well, in Heidelberg, I argued with people which I would have blocked if they were on Twitter. And then this person turns around and suddenly cares about another person. So we should keep this sense of community before people radicalize themselves. I am often talking to an Indian person who is talking about mobs who are difficult to bring back into the middle of society. So yeah, you kind of also have to support and endure the positions of other people to draw them back into the middle of society. Unfortunately, many people who are taking a public stance are threatened physically. I hope that we will be able to close this Pandora's box. What Italian people love to do is having passeggiata in the evening and going out for a walk, meeting people, chatting. This would be a good solution, wouldn't it? Shouldn't we all get into this habit? Yeah. We want to see each other, and passeggiata is also like caring about the other. Jagoda, this conference couldn't have started better. Thank you so much for being here and bringing us these important words. Thank you.